Buenos días, buenas tardes, everyone, educators, educational professionals, those that support students. We are so excited to have a Cafecito Virtual with Doctora Laura Gonzalez, the creator of SoMuchPotential.org and a professor, advocate, friend from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Doctora Gonzalez, bienvenida, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here with both of you.
So we understand that you are someone that really understands the intersection of race, ethnicity, and all of those other components that make someone unique. Barriers, experiences, discrimination, access, languages, and the list goes on and on and on. And I appreciate that you bring to the table this holistic view of education. Can you tell us a little bit about you and also helping us understand why this group of students and who are we talking about?
Absolutely. So my name is, as was said, Laura Gonzalez, but I grew up as Laura McLaughlin. So my family is Scott, Irish, and German. Fifth or sixth generation immigrant is kind of my personal story. And I think that's important because the Gonzalez comes from my husband, who is originally from Panama. And so we together have a blended family that includes bilingual, bicultural. And so I have both a personal appreciation for understanding other cultures, languages, as you mentioned, Juanes, but I also have a professional interest in promoting education across all those many groups. So I personally grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, but I've lived here in North Carolina for about 25 years now. So North Carolina definitely feels like home to me. I met my husband in a salsa and merengue dancing class in Raleigh. But now we have 3 kids, and so we don't get to go out dancing quite as much as we used to. But I say that all to say that I am sort of a white person who cares deeply about progress for Latinx folks. And so I just want to be clear that I'm speaking as an ally or an advocate, as you said, and also as somebody who has spent time studying and thinking about how can I use whatever resources, tools, and privilege I have to remove some of the barriers that you talked about and to help to increase access in any way that I can. And so that's part of how the So Much Potential website grew.
And that is so important. And I think that this is really important tip for educators that there's something that we can do about it, right? And I think that you are allowing us to move and shift from describing in your research. And if you have not seen Dr. Gonzalez research, you should look at it because she really provides an ample information about all of those barriers that are affecting communities, to the point that she goes beyond just mentioning some of those barriers. She compared it to other ethnic and minority groups. And I have really appreciate that. But what Dr. Gonzalez has done is move beyond describing those barriers to giving us and empower us to say, we can do something about it. And I think that that's really important message. Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. I'm gonna let Juana ask you if she has a question that comes out for her.
Yeah, and I just thank you for sharing your story. I love to dance. I also don't go dancing as much as I used to, mainly because, you know, my husband doesn't like to dance. But yeah, thank you so much for being an advocate and ally for all students and also for our Latino Latinx students. As a lot of us know, they experience many barriers and challenges when it comes to access to post-secondary education. And so I would love to just for you to share a little bit about the the so much potential that you created, and kind of what was that process like? And I'm just really curious also to know, like, what were some of the things that you learned along the way as you were creating and developing this resource for educators? And one of the things that Juanes and I always talk about is, we need allies like you, and our allies don't have to, people that support Latinos and education don't have to be Latinos, right? And so they have to be people that truly care and that really want to support. And I think you're one of those individuals here in North Carolina. So anyways, just tell us a little bit about like just that process, but then also I'm really curious to learning, like, what were some of the lessons learned while you were working on your research and then this research that you were creating?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the So Much Potential website grew out of a lot of conversations I was having with Latinx community families. And so in part that was talking to the parents about how they felt about their ability to be supportive of their kids. Just knowing that anytime you enter a new cultural context, it just takes a while to become familiar with what are the steps, what are the processes. If I was transported to another country and asked to plan my children's educational future, I would also be at first just a little bit unsure, not knowing what are the tools, how do I, work in this new context. So I definitely heard from a lot of the parents that they absolutely had aspirations for their kids. And as you all well know, like coming to this country as an immigrant, oftentimes a better future for your children is a big motivator. So I definitely heard loud and clear from the parents their desire for their kids to have more doors open for them, but also a little bit of worry that they just were less familiar with this setting and weren't sure themselves how to help their kids get there. Then I simultaneously heard from students in those families that when they tried to get help from folks in the school setting, it was kind of a mixed experience. Sometimes it was positive. Sometimes they found people who understood kind of some of the experiences that come with living in an immigrant family. But sometimes they just came across folks who either didn't know how to help or sometimes were too busy and kind of gave the impression like, I don't have time to learn all of this and be able to help you. So I definitely heard interest in education, desire, motivation, resourcefulness on the part of Latinx families, but just the desire to have some more tools and that people in the schools maybe could use a little bit of an assist in terms of getting themselves better prepared to work with students from immigrant families. In particular, I heard a lot from people who were in mixed status families. So times when a student had DACA or one or the other adult in the family may not have had a permanent legal status, or some siblings did have status and some siblings didn't. So that just adds an additional layer of complication to college planning. And again, even school counselors, let's say, who had the best of intentions and were really motivated to help students, sometimes just didn't know like all the ins and outs of, well, what do you do if a parent doesn't have a social security number? Or, are there laws in place that would prevent students from applying or receiving financial aid? And so there's a lot of misinformation swirling around out there. And then there's a lot of people who work in schools are busy anyhow. And so they don't often have enough time to sort of remedy any gaps in their knowledge and understanding. So that's kind of where I thought, maybe this is a place I could make a contribution, is to pull together a resource that was based on the conversations I had with Latinx families about kind of what they were encountering and what they needed, and to sort of help schools be in a better position to provide that help that families were needing. I really appreciate what you've said about what did I learn along the way. And I definitely have to give a shout out to CFNC, who has been at the forefront of helping families all across our state with college access, with paying for college, applying for college. And so advocates like you all have been a big part of how I have learned more about experiences of families and resources to help families. So in this process, in addition to talking to Juana and to lots of other folks that I have known in the sort of advocacy community, I learned a lot more about kind of what are their go-to resources or strategies, or how have they found success in working with families before. So I tried to pull all of that lived knowledge from advocates and community members together and like package it in a way that school staff would find it easy enough to navigate, that even during their busy day, they might be able to kind of like just click a few places and then give students information that was accurate and helpful to them.
Wow. Yeah, I love you.
Igualmente.
I just love that you took the time to listen to our students, listen to our families, what are their needs, what are the challenges, and that you created this resource for our educators. And one of the things that you mentioned is that our counselors are busy, right? I'm just thinking about here in Wake County, there's one counselor for 400 students. And so I just think about how can a school counselor see the student and just take the time to walk them through the process. And so I think when we're talking about educators, and when I think about educators, I'm thinking about anyone that works with students, whether it's a community partner, whether it's a college access professional. It doesn't necessarily has to be a counselor, right? And so yeah, I just think about there are so many trusted influencers in North Carolina working with students, and now they have this really cool resource that you have created to help students, guide them along the way. So thank you again for doing that. And Juanes, I don't know if there's something that you would like to add to that, but yeah, and I'll just lastly say that as an immigrant student with parents that with very limited education, it was really tough for me to navigate the system and the process. And I didn't really have anybody in the school who supported me. It was actually an outside organization who came into the school and supported me throughout the process. And so I can definitely relate to a lot of the experiences that many of our immigrant students face today.
Thank you so much. I picked on a lot of yummy stuff, and I think a lot of the things that we try to do is to hear and to listen to what the community is saying, and I think that is actually what probably makes so much potential different from other resources, is that you took the time to hear the lived experiences of those being affected by those policies, and you find ways to share knowledge and resources and about how to overcome maybe some of those and provide some ideas. So I love that you use that that lens that pick up on the wealth that we have as a culture. And you mentioned, like using education as that main motivator, because I have not met one person that tells me that education is not important. Maybe it looks different in the way that parents are involved in the processes are different, but I have yet to find someone that does not believe that education is important, right? It might be a community college, technical education, workforce, but you need some sort of learning. So I am more now I probably want to get a little bit more into the technicalities of somuchpotential.org. And so for those that are not familiar, somuchpotential.org is a comprehensive website. It is a website and it is so full of yummy resources. But for Dr. Gonzalez, for someone that is not familiar with So Much Potential, can you tell us like who is the primary audience of the page and some components in the page that people would be able to find in that page? And I can even, if we need to, we can even share that website and you can tell us about it.
Sure. So the primary audience is school staff. And I appreciate what Juana said about not just school counselors, because school counselors have sort of as a named part of their job to help students who are interested in kind of exploring their post-secondary opportunities. But oftentimes, I think in schools, it ends up being like a teacher who formed a really important connection with a student, a staff person. Sometimes it's somebody who has sort of an immigrant history or background themselves, who feels called to, notice those students and take the time to kind of check in with them and try to help them get resources. So school staff writ large, but primarily school counselors. And I think I really appreciate what Juana said about students' stories. And in fact, there's a section of the website that does include kind of directly some of those students' narratives as a way to help school staff who maybe have not had the opportunity to talk very in depth with students who come from immigrant families and to understand some of the things that you all explained so well about motivation, but also barriers and experiences. And so the stories are also there to help inform and humanize for school staff who might not have as much lived experience talking to immigrant families. The page is also written such that families themselves can, of course, directly access it. So there's no gate saying only you can come, but not everybody else. So I also hope that students who want to kind of take it upon themselves to learn more about financial aid opportunities, for example, would be able to access the site and navigate it and learn some things. It's also the case that most of it is in English, but there are some sections that are in Spanish. So because the main audience was school staff, that's why the choice was made to put most information in English. So I do want parents who are more comfortable learning in other languages to know that there are some sections that have Spanish language resources, and CFNC, again, is another great place to go for Spanish language resources. So the site hopes to be inclusive in that way. And I'm happy to kind of talk you through what else is on the site. We can, if you want to share a screen, I'm happy to do it that way, or to just sort of roll on with the sections of the site.
Sure, I think maybe just for benefit of everyone, I can just pull it up, and then maybe we can probably just introduce people to the website, and maybe they can do some exploring on their own. But maybe if there's like 2 or 3 highlights that you would like to mention, then that would be great. Let me see where I can get access to that. And while I'm pulling the website up, I'm gonna give Juana the microphone.
Yeah, I was going to mention, I have it up, Juanes, if you want me to share it, unless you want to.
Yeah, go ahead, Juana.
Okay. So.
Awesome. So at this introductory page, there we go. I'll just mention that under Start Here, it includes sort of some basics. So if you are a school staff person who, for example, sometimes feels lost and confused about all these different legal terms that are used to describe a variety of immigration statuses, or if sometimes you've heard information and you're not really sure if it's true or not. So under Start Here, there's kind of a basic orientation section that helps school staff understand things like what are some misconceptions that people have about immigrants and mixed status families and their ability to go to college or to receive financial aid. It also includes just kind of a basic primer on language related to, what does it mean to have temporary protected status, or what does it mean to have DACA, or what does it mean to be adjusting status or to be a permanent legal immigrant. So this is just a way for school staff to kind of ground themselves and make sure that they have correct information because of that picture there that says do no harm and benefit students. So I think it's an ethical obligation actually of school staff to make sure that they are informed and have correct information that they can use to help students. And then sort of for folks who work in schools on college access, or for anybody in the community who works on college access, admissions and financial aid are kind of 2 of the big areas where people have work to do. And so the admissions section includes both some quick resources, like if there's a student in front of you right now, what should you do? So that's the number 3 box there. If there's a student right in front of you, just go to FAQs and see if something they're asking you matches something that's asked and answered there. Or if you know in advance, for example, that you're going to be working with a population that contains a fair amount of students from immigrant families, and you have some professional development time over the summer or during the school year, you might want to watch some of the great CFNC webinars that are linked there under number 1, or review some other websites that will help just give you a general lay of the land about college access, specifically with immigrant populations under number 2. I will just mention under financial aid that I know that paying for education is a big concern for almost any family that's thinking about college, but in particular, if there are undocumented members of a family, I think this becomes even more worrisome, because sometimes even students who were born here are afraid to apply for financial aid because they don't want to endanger a family member who might not have permanent legal status. So there's just a list here of scholarships that are open to students that are regardless of immigration status. And I think even just seeing that list can start to give students some hope. Like, oh, wait, it may not be that I can apply for every single scholarship, or that I maybe will have trouble utilizing the FAFSA, but there are lots of ways that I can still think about and access financial aid, not through the federal government. So there are private sources, there are community organizations that wish to support educational access and help to finance it. Sometimes schools themselves have, a fund that they can use. So I hope that people will see that list of scholarships and be encouraged. The other thing I'll just mention under the financial aid section is people who may be able to use the FAFSA. So it kind of goes through eligibility questions like, do I fill out the FAFSA? Do I not? Then there's sort of more of those nuts and bolts about, if I can use the FAFSA, how do I do that in a way that also provides accurate information and doesn't endanger family members? And again, a lot of this is drawn from CFNC, so I just really am grateful and appreciate the presence of the resources you all have gathered. The other thing that I'll just point out quickly, and then I'll see if you all have more questions, is under resources, I really tried to think about the different regions of our state. So I used to live in Raleigh. I'm familiar with kind of triangle area resources. I now live in Greensboro, so I know a little bit about triad area resources. And then I know that in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area, just kind of the urban centers of our state have more organizations, maybe more advocacy going on, more people working on these issues. However, I was thinking about the small towns. I grew up in a small town, and so I kind of understand what that's like. And I was thinking about students living in the small towns across our state who may not know where to plug into these kinds of resources. And so I tried very hard, not only for students, but also for the school counselors who may work in those communities, to think about, if I was a school counselor and I really wanted to be in a better position to help my immigrant students, but I wasn't sure what resources were around me, where would I start? So I tried to find both some statewide resources that can be accessed via internet and some specific regional resources that people could use to kind of reach out, just to find, where are the immigrant serving organizations? Who could I start with, just to better understand what the needs are in my community? So whether you're in the central, eastern, or western part of our states, hopefully you will find some resources there that could help you get started. I think this will just be the list of all resources, which is great. And then if you wanted to only hone in on like Eastern or Western, for example, you can use the little drop-down box of type of resource that will help you get to Eastern North Carolina, Central North Carolina, Western North Carolina, some of the Spanish language videos, some national resources. So again, hopefully it helps people figure out where they are, what's nearby, and what they can access to help students. Let me just stop there and see what thoughts or questions, or what else you might like for us to highlight.
I really appreciate how detailed so much potential is. I appreciate how much work it went to it to also connect these individuals. Juana mentioned a keyword for us, and is trusted influencers, and those individuals that serve our students and families, and that sometimes they may not be the counselors. They might be someone from the community that they may not get this sort of training. And so I think this resource will do that. I love that you mentioned how that is a responsibility for us to get educated and to learn that there is a lot of information, a lot of information that is not true. Here in North Carolina, all students, regardless of immigration status, are able to go to college, period. But I think the question then becomes, how can I afford going to college? And I think you have really important resources there for to help us figure out that. And I think you also mentioned a keyword for me, and I think you mentioned giving them hope, giving students from this community the opportunity to dream big, to dream about possibilities that may not be right now, might not be possible, especially for those students that are impacted by immigration. You also mentioned that, you know, when we're talking to students, for some of them might be first generation. We're working with large group of first generation students. So even learning some of this vocabulary that we use in higher education, the FAFSA, an admission application, the SAT, ACT, we hear these terms every day, but we have to recognize that these are new terminology, especially for first generation students. And so this is important. I wanted to talk to you about something that you said, and is that why is that connection to resources and to people so important? What is the literature telling us about that connection?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, again, considering the times that a young person who's thinking about their future, you know, who will they turn to? So oftentimes they'll turn to a family member. But again, if your parents grew up in a different country, they just may not know as much about the resources in this country. So then I think a young person is kind of looking around like, who else can I trust? Who else can I turn to? Sometimes they're lucky enough to have like a cousin who went to college or a neighbor. But sometimes, especially in a new arrival state like North Carolina, there may not be those possibility models around for students to see. And again, if they look around in schools, sometimes they're lucky and they find someone who is equipped to help them and who has the desire to help them. But sometimes they may have a hard time finding kind of who that is. And so I'm glad you mentioned first generation college students, because I think it is a really similar journey in that I hear a lot of first gen students talking about like, well, I just had to make this path by myself. Like it was hard and I didn't know what questions to ask. And I just had to keep pushing forward, and things that would take other people 30 minutes probably took me 3 hours because I was just building this process myself. And so I think my desire is to also encourage and give hope to students and families, but also to equip those of us in the community to be better able to kind of come around those students and support them effectively, so that people don't have to feel like they're all alone on this pathway, kind of, you know, making a trail where no trail had been. And I agree with you, like looking for who those people might be. Like some of my research has started with Spanish speaking pastors in churches. So like sometimes that's the first place to go to just understand like, how do I find other people who are in touch with immigrant families and understand their issues and are already bringing resources around them to help them. So I do think that for something as complicated as access to college, which literally it's like harder than applying for a job. You know, it takes like planning for years and like knowledge of all these terms and all these different forms. And I mean, it is hard. And if you feel like you're doing that all by yourself, you may sometimes have wavering doubt and wonder if it's too much and if you should just stop. And so I never want a student to feel so overwhelmed by the process that they would just give up and stop. And I think that the name of the website, So Much Potential, comes from a quote of one of the students I was talking to who said, like, I have pushed forward and I have been exhausted and sometimes at the edge of giving up. And I've even seen some of my friends who did give up, and the student said, which is such a shame to me because they have so much potential, but because they didn't have somebody there to kind of help them and encourage them and give them resources and help smooth the path so that it wasn't so difficult all the time. Sometimes students have, at least temporarily, kind of given up or delayed and deferred their dreams. And so I think that connection is important so that we don't experience that kind of discouragement and students kind of opting out of the pathway, when there are, especially in North Carolina, so many different types of institutions and so many different ways to get to college. So it's not like everybody has to go, certainly not to UNCG, everybody doesn't have to go to Wake Forest. We can all find an institution that's a good fit for us, and hopefully not have to be burdened by having to do that on our own.
Yeah, thank you for that. And one of the things that I feel is so important is as trusted influencers and educators and community leaders is to have accurate information. Juanes and I have worked with some students that unfortunately they were misguided, they were misinformed, they stop the process because of exactly what you said, right? They just get overwhelmed. And so it's so important to have accurate information, and you are providing this amazing resource where they can find a lot of the information that they need. So I want to know or hear from you in regards to, like, now this website has been around for like what, 2 years now? Like, gosh, I can't remember.
Two pandemic years, so.
And so I'm just curious, what kind of feedback have you received from educators that are utilizing this resource and this tool to help their students? Just what are you hearing from?
Yeah, so I have had, again, because of the pandemic, it's been harder than I had hoped for, to like go to conferences. There haven't been as many in-person conferences, or, schools have been sometimes virtual. So the times when I have been able to do, for example, webinars like this, like I did one together with Adelante, NC, I have definitely heard people saying, like, this is helpful because there were pieces in there I didn't know, or because it's just all gathered here together in a place where I don't have to kind of know what are the admissions resources and then know over here, like how to navigate residency determination, and over here, what to do about financial aid, that it kind of brings it all together. And I do know that educators are busy, and especially in this sort of pandemic-y times, like educators are also burned out and exhausted and having to do a lot of work. And so anything I can do to kind of make that easy, I'm glad to do. We are in the process of doing an evaluation of the website right now, just to try to learn more about how useful it has been to school staff. And so hopefully by the end of the spring, I will have a better sense of that. I think the informal feedback has been good, but I'm also really interested in just getting it out into more people's hands. And so I really appreciate you all giving me this moment at the microphone to, spread the word a little bit about the website. And if anybody's listening, and if you hear something here that's useful to you, all I ask is that you think of somebody else, pasar la voz, help other people learn about it too.
Yeah, and I'll say that personally, I have learned a lot of new things and just coming to the website, and I've been able to look at the different organizations that are supporting our students across the state, which I feel like it's an incredible resource to have, especially since Juanes and I, we do cover the state of North Carolina, and connecting with those organizations is so important. So I personally have had a really positive experience and utilizing your resources and using the website. So thank you.
Yeah. I wanted to mention actually, about things we learned. So down at the bottom of almost every page, there's a little light bulb and it says insider tips. So those insider tips were things that I learned along the way from people. One of those people is Katia Castellon, who had worked at UNCG admissions office, specifically doing outreach to Spanish-speaking families. And so because she had spent so long sort of helping people whose situations were very complicated and difficult, like sort of navigate, well, what are the ways you can go if it's not sort of a clear, straight pathway forward and you have to do a little bit of left to right, left to right. So she helped me learn, for example, about the business sponsorship possibilities, which I hadn't known about before, that if a family owns a business that is registered in North Carolina, that there can be ways for students who are employed in those businesses, even if it's a family business, to then also pay an in-state tuition rate through that, mostly with the community colleges. There's also lots of great tips in there about using summer camps to help students gain greater exposure to campuses. Like at UNCG, we have a camp called Chance that's specifically for Latinx students. I know at NC State, they have Juntos. So the insider tips section, I really do encourage people who are doing this work with immigrant families to kind of look at all these amazing pro tips from advocates in the community who have had to strategize and kind of do anything possible to get students closer to their dreams.
And I'm so glad you're mentioning tips, consejitos, because that's actually something we do like to provide in this Cafecitos. We do like to speak specifically to, you know, educators for the purpose of today's video. But do you have, if you would have one tip for each of the populations that may have access to this, which is the students, the families, and those that support those students, could be counselors, could be any of those trusted influencers, what advice or consejitos do you have for them?
Oh, gladly. So I think for students, I would say your path to post-secondary education may look narrower than other students' paths. But as you both have said, it is not a closed door. There is still a pathway forward. And so just to help them believe that that is true, because I know sometimes students themselves hear the misinformation and start to believe, oh, I can't go to college, it's not possible. So I would really say to students, like, don't stop believing. And even if the pathway is narrow, there have been students before you who have found a way forward. So you can also keep trying to move forward. And I think for parents, I would say it's okay to ask. Like sometimes, especially parents who feel a little bit of nervousness about going into a school and asking questions in English, or they may come from a place where you give great deference and respect to school authorities, and you figure, well, they're doing their job. It's not my place to even ask them or to kind of push them to do something else for my kids. But I would encourage parents, it's okay to ask. Even if you have to get, request a translator to be present with you in these meetings, or, find somebody else in the school who could help in case there's any language issues. School counselors can and do meet with families, or, teachers who are interested in being allied to your students. Like, it's okay to ask the school to do better by your students. And then for the school staff themselves, well, I guess this kind of applies to all. I would say it's so important to find a mentor, a support system, a role model. So if you're working in schools and this is kind of a new area for you, if you haven't done a lot to serve immigrant families before, don't feel like you have to do this alone. Use the CFNC resources, use the resources from So Much Potential, find other people in your school district or in your professional organizations who you can lean on or ask questions if you just aren't certain about what to say. None of us have to do this alone. And even if you at first don't think you have a support system or network, push a little, look around, and I bet you will find some. And equally for the family members, I think so many of the stories that I heard from students were about like one key person who believed in them and helped to provide the information they needed. And you never know, for those of us who are educators, you never know when you might be that one person who gave a little bit of encouragement or advice and made a big difference in a student's trajectory. So I would say find mentors or support systems, or don't be afraid to be a mentor or a role model to a student, because sometimes that little push might be all that they need.
I laugh because one of the things that we joke with our students is that everyone needs a tío or tía. Everyone needs to find that one person, and actually counselors, it might be you might not even know that you're somebody's tío or tía, and they're counting on you, asking you about, could be random things, it could be about college, it could be about just life in general, just navigating. So it's just really yeah, it just works that way. And I love that you also mentioned having that trust and developing that trust. And you mentioned that it takes also authenticity. And I
Mm,
think that also like recognizing that maybe we don't have all the answers, but hey, we can do it together. And I think that's something that Juan and I take proud that, you know, we are very different in many ways, but we go our, you know, in our stories and our journeys with confidence that we are being authentic selves, that we're trying to do the best we can with what we have. Might not be
mm.
perfect, but we're making, you know, we're making a difference with what we have. So I do appreciate that message. Juana, anything else that we have not mentioned that we need to mention?
No, I think we've covered some really great information, and I'm just really excited that we're able to share this amazing resource with our educators in North Carolina. I know that there are a lot of people out there that want to help our students, and they may be a little nervous because, like you mentioned, Dr. Gonzalez, they may not know the steps and the process, and they don't want to misguide the students. So this is such an amazing tool and resource for our educators that want to help students. And like you mentioned, right, students can also go in there and take a look at all the resources. But I just want to say thank you. Thank you, because I feel like we need people like you in our lives, and just in North Carolina, to help move the needle forward towards education, right, for our Latino and especially our immigrant students that really struggle with the process, and our first generation students. And so thank you. I just can't thank you enough. Like, I'm just so really grateful for you and others that are working to advance education for our students in North Carolina. So educators, take a look at somuchpotential.org and all the amazing resources that Dr. Gonzalez has been able to compile together for you as you're working with your students.
And I just want to thank you both as well. You have been very meaningful role models and examples for me. I appreciate your helping to elevate this work, but even more than that, I appreciate all you have done to sort of elevate the lives of Latinx families across this state. You are tireless and probably don't get thanked nearly enough. So I truly appreciate you both and your work as well.
Dr. Gonzalez, if anyone is interested in continuing the conversation, if anyone is interested, and I know there's so much more that we have not talked today. You know, we did not talk about licensure. We did not talk about beyond access, right? This whole concept of completion and retention. And there's so much more that we can talk about. But for the purposes of today's Cafecito, we're giving you an introduction to so much potential. We hope to continue these conversations that are so important to our communities. How can we continue the conversation? I know that So Much Potential has a contact us piece in the website. Is that the best way?
Yes, it is, because in fact, all three of us are listed in that contact us. And so if people want to communicate with me, I'm certainly happy. You can put your information in the form under contact us. And if people have direct questions, like if you're working in a school and you would like to request CFNC materials or have a conversation with either Juana or Juanes, then you can find ways to communicate with all three of us there.
Thank you so much. And we do, and just before we conclude, we do have the opportunity to, we have a program called Train the Trainer. We look at it from two lenses. One is for those individuals providing direct services to students, specifically those organizations that are helping students to complete FAFSA, to work on college applications, and they don't receive any other training. So we have one program to go or do a training for them. And we also have trainings for counselors that we work with counselors in all the different aspects of supporting students through these experiences. So just wanted to mention that we do have that available. We do have cfnc.org. The information can be accessed also in Espanol. We also have included So Much Potential in our website, which we're really excited. And so our students and families can benefit from that. We do have additional resources in our YouTube channel. including some of the resources that So Much Potential shares. So we're here for you. And that's really, I think what I want to end this is we are here for you. You're not alone. You have individuals like Dr. Gonzalez that are supporting us through this processes. So thank you so much. I hope you guys enjoy this Cafecito Virtual. If you like to learn more about CFNC, about future topics, you can check cfnc.org/events. You can see some of the statewide initiatives we have. Every month we have one specifically in Spanish services. So go check those out. And Dr. Gonzalez, again, thank you for your time, and we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Gracias.